Imagine this. You're trapped in a locked boardroom with a billionaire CEO who is literally growling at his staff. He's dangerous, he's furious, and he's about to snap. So what do? You decide to scratch him behind the ear, and instead of firing you, his leg starts thumping like a puppy. Welcome to Lena's Romantasy Collection. Whether you're a new listener or a returning pack member, we are diving into a story about a savage alpha who melts for the right touch. If you love possessive alphas and brave heroines, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And I want to know my pack. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Now, let's unleash the beast. Chapter 1. The Boardroom and the Beast. The 50th floor boardroom of The Summit didn't smell like a corporate office. It smelled like rain on hot asphalt, expensive espresso, and something sharper, something like ozone right before a lightning strike. I, Diana Galloway, stood by the heavy oak double doors, clutching my tablet like a shield. My knuckles were white. I checked the time on my watch. 2:14 p.m. We were 14 minutes into the quarterly merger meeting, and I was already calculating the fastest escape route to the stairwell. At the head of the obsidian table sat Ryan Godfrey. To the world, he was the billionaire CEO of Godfrey Global, a tech mogul who moved markets with a whisper. To me, he was the most difficult, temperamental, and terrifying boss I had ever worked for in my 10 years as an executive assistant. And today, he looked ready to murder someone. "The merger numbers are off," Ryan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it seemed to vibrate against the glass walls. He didn't look up from the file in front of him. His dark hair was chaotic, as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours, and his shoulders, broad enough to block out the sun, were locked tight under his charcoal suit. "It's a rounding error, Mr. Godfrey," Mason Vaughn said smoothly from the other end of the table. Mason was Ryan's cousin and the company's head of oversight. He was smiling that slick, shark-like smile that made my skin crawl. "Hardly worth delaying the vote. The Northridge investors are waiting." Ryan's head snapped up. His eyes, usually a cold steel gray, looked feverishly bright today, almost yellow. "It is my company, Mason," Ryan rasped. He sounded sick. He looked sick. There were dark circles under his eyes and a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the room being kept at a freezing 65 degrees. A weird quirk of the building I still hadn't gotten used to. "We don't have rounding errors." A heavy silence fell over the room. The 12 other board members, all men, all massive, all wearing suits that looked too tight for their muscular frames, stared at the table, refusing to make eye contact with Ryan. Thump. I blinked. A heavy, rhythmic sound came from under the table. Thump. Thump. Ryan's jaw clenched. He gripped the edge of the obsidian table so hard I heard the wood groan. He looked like a man holding back an explosion. 5-minute recess, Ryan barked, shoving his chair back with enough force to nearly tip it. "Get out, all of you." "But Ryan," Mason started, his smile faltering. "Out!" The roar wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, and it rattled the heavy glass water pitcher in the center of the table. The board members scrambled up like terrified schoolchildren and practically ran for the door. Mason lingered for a second, his eyes narrowing at Ryan, before he smoothed his tie and followed them out, brushing past me with a scent of expensive cologne and something metallic. I should have left too. That was the smart move. When Ryan Godfrey got in a mood, you evacuated the blast zone. But I couldn't leave. I had a job to do, and frankly, I needed the bonus this merger would bring. My dog, Ranger, needed hip surgery, and vet bills didn't pay themselves. "Mr. Godfrey," I said, stepping into the room instead of out of it. The air felt heavy, charged with static. "You have the investors from Tokyo calling in 10 minutes. Ryan was standing by the panoramic window, his forehead pressed against the cold glass. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "Cancel it," he choked out. "I can't. It took me 3 months to set this up." I walked over to the side table and poured a glass of ice water. "You're overheated. Drink this." "Diana, leave." His voice was strained, like gravel grinding together. I'm not feeling well." I walked up behind him. He was radiating heat like a furnace. Standing this close, I realized just how massive he was. I was 5'7" in my heels, and I still felt like a child standing next to a mountain. "You have a migraine," I said firmly, setting the water down on the table near him. "I told you to stop staring at the screens. The blue light is triggering it." He didn't turn. He was shaking. A visible tremor ran through his massive frame. "It's not a migraine," he growled. "It's noise. Too much noise." I looked at him. He looked like he was about to snap in half. Instinct took over. It was the same instinct that made me adopt Ranger, my Belgian Malinois, when everyone else said he was too aggressive. I saw pain where others saw danger. "Okay," I whispered. "Just breathe." Without thinking, honestly, my brain must have temporarily disconnected, I reached out. "Diana, don't—" I ignored him. I stepped closer and reached up, my fingers finding the spot right behind his left ear. It was a trick I used on Ranger when he got overstimulated during thunderstorms. There was a pressure point there, right at the base of the skull, that released tension instantly. My fingers brushed against his hair. It was shockingly soft, thick and silky, contrasting with the hard tension of his neck. I found the dip behind his ear and dug my nails in, just a little, scratching firmly in a rhythmic circle. Ryan froze. His entire body went rigid. "Oh, God," I thought, panic finally hitting me. "I'm fired. I'm absolutely fired. I'm touching the billionaire CEO." I started to pull my hand away. "I'm so sorry." "No." The word was a breathless plea. Ryan's head tilted back, pushing specifically into my hand. Thump. Thump. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was louder this time. I looked down. Ryan's left leg was bouncing. No, not bouncing. It was thumping against the floor in a rapid, uncontrollable rhythm, like a dog getting a good scratch. "Don't stop," Ryan groaned, his voice dropping so low it vibrated in the soles of my shoes. He slumped forward, his forehead resting against the cool glass of the window, offering me better access to his neck. All the tension drained out of his shoulders instantly. "Mr. Godfrey?" I whispered, totally bewildered. "Right there," he mumbled, sounding drunk. "Harder." I stood there, scratching the billionaire Alpha King behind the ear, while his leg thumped a beat on the carpet. Suddenly, the boardroom door swung open. "Hey, big brother, I forgot my—" Cale Godfrey froze in the doorway. Ryan's younger brother, looking effortlessly cool in a leather jacket and designer jeans, stared at us. He looked at Ryan, whose eyes were rolled back in bliss. He looked at Ryan's thumping leg. Then he looked at me, his mouth hanging open. Ryan let out a low, rumbling sound that was suspiciously close to a purr. Cale's eyes went wide. A slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. "Well," Cale drawled, leaning against the doorframe, "this is going to make the Christmas newsletter." Chapter 2. The Morning After. Ryan Godfrey's eyes snapped open. The gold flash I thought I'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by pure, mortified panic. He spun around, nearly knocking me over, his face flushing a deep, dark red that started at his neck and went all the way to his hairline. "Cale," Ryan snarled, trying to regain his composure, but failing because his leg gave one last, traitorous thump against the floorboards. "Get out." "Nope." Cale popped the pea, walking into the room and grabbing a green apple from the untouched fruit bowl on the center table. He took a loud, crunchy bite, his eyes dancing with amusement. "I think I'm going to stay. I want to see if she can make you roll over. Do you sit for treats too? Or is that just a weekend thing?" "I will kill you," Ryan warned. "I will actually end you." "Mr. Godfrey," I interrupted, stepping back and smoothing my skirt, trying to salvage whatever shreds of professionalism were left in the room. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "I apologize. You seemed in pain. I overstepped." Ryan looked at me. For a second, the anger vanished from his face, replaced by something confusing. Vulnerability? He looked at his hand, which was still trembling slightly, then back at me. "You didn't overstep," he said, his voice gruff but quiet. "It helped. The headache is gone." "Headache?" Cale snorted, tossing the apple core into a trash bin with perfect aim. Is that what we're calling the beast now? A headache? Kale, Ryan warned again, this time with a dangerous edge. Fine, fine. Silence is golden, Kale said, raising his hands in mock surrender. He turned his charm on me, flashing a bright, boyish smile. I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Kale, the fun Godfrey. You must be the miracle worker. I'm Diana, I said, eyeing him warily. The Godfrey brothers couldn't be more different. Ryan was a fortress, dark, imposing, and silent. Kale was a carnival ride, loud, flashy, and probably dangerous if you didn't hold on tight. I'm Mr. Godfrey's executive assistant. Diana, Kale repeated, testing the name. Well, Diana, if Ryan ever fires you for, inappropriate touching, come find me. I could use someone to scratch behind my ears. Ryan growled. It wasn't a metaphor. A low, vibrating rumble emanated from his chest, loud enough that the water in the glass on the table rippled. Out, Ryan commanded. Now! Kale laughed, winked at me, and sauntered out of the room. See you at dinner, brother. Bring a leash. The door clicked shut, leaving us in silence. The air conditioning hummed. The city of Seattle lay gray and rainy outside the panoramic windows. Ryan refused to look at me. He walked over to his chair, picked up his suit jacket, and put it on, buttoning it with precise, jerky movements. We never speak of this, he said to the wall. Agreed, I said quickly. It was unprofessional. I'm sorry. I didn't say it was unprofessional, he muttered, finally turning to face me. He looked better. The frantic energy was gone. His eyes were a calm, steel gray. I said we don't speak of it because my brother is an idiot, and I don't want the rumors spreading to the lower floors. Understood. I checked my tablet, pivoting back to work mode because it was the only safe ground. The Tokyo call is in 4 minutes. Do you want to take it, or should I reschedule? Ryan looked at me. He seemed to be studying my face, looking for something. Judgment? Fear? I'll take it, he said. Diana? Yes, sir. Thank you. The way he said it, sincere, heavy, caught me off guard. He walked past me toward his private office, but he paused at the door. And cancel my dinner with Mason tonight. Tell him I have fleas. I stared at his back as the door closed. Did Ryan Godfrey just make a joke? I returned to my desk just outside his office, sinking into my chair. My hands were shaking slightly. I looked at the tips of my fingers, the ones that had been buried in his hair just moments ago. What is going on with this man? My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. How's the job, honey? Still dating that nice accountant? I ignored the accountant question and typed back, Job is fine, boss is weird. I think he might be on drugs, or he really likes scalp massages. I looked at the closed door of the CEO's office. The savage luxury of the office suddenly felt different. The rough stone walls, the dim lighting, the freezing temperature. It didn't feel like a tech company. It felt like a den. And for a brief, crazy second, I remembered the sound of his leg thumping against the floor. Thump. Thump. I shook my head. Get it together, Diana, I whispered to myself. He's just an eccentric billionaire. They all have weird quirks. Elon Musk probably likes to be petted too. I opened the merger file, determined to ignore the fact that my boss had growled at his brother like a rabid animal. Chapter 3. The Savage Luxury. By Wednesday, 3 days after the ear scratch incident, things at Godfrey Global had returned to a tense sort of normal. Or as normal as things ever got in a building that felt more like a Bond villain's lair than a corporate headquarters. I arrived at the summit at 7:30 a.m. sharp. The building was a brutalist masterpiece of raw concrete and vertical gardens, looming over downtown Seattle like a fortress. I parked my Subaru Outback in the employee garage, on the 3rd level, far away from the massive, customized trucks and matte black SUVs the executives drove. As I gathered my bag, I checked the back seat. Be a good boy, Ranger, I told the empty seat. My dog was at doggy daycare today, but I still found myself talking to him. Mommy has to go deal with the other alpha males. The elevator ride up to the 50th floor was silent and fast. When the doors opened, the temperature drop hit me instantly. 65 degrees. Always. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself and walked to my desk. The 50th floor was an open-concept nightmare of dark mahogany, slate floors, and shadows. There were no fluorescent lights here, only warm, amber recessed lighting that made everyone look tan and rich, but made reading spreadsheets a strain on the eyes. "Morning, Diana," a voice grunted. I looked up. It was Silas, the VP of Operations. Silas was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow. He was carrying a Tupperware container. "Morning, Silas," I said brightly. "How was the weekend?" "Good. Went hunting," he said. He popped the lid of his container. The smell hit me instantly. Raw meat. Not rare steak, raw. Cubes of beef, bloody and unseasoned. He popped a cube into his mouth and chewed happily. I tried not to gag. "That's high protein." "Paleo diet," Silas grunted. "Ryan in yet?" "He's in the gym," I said, pointing to the private elevator that led to the roof. Silas nodded and walked off, chewing loudly. I sighed and sat down. This whole company was obsessed with paleo diets, intermittent fasting, and cryotherapy. The break room fridge was always full of raw steaks and bone broth. There was never a single yogurt cup or salad in sight. It was like working for a gym full of cavemen who also happened to know how to code. My intercom buzzed. "Diana," Ryan's voice. "Yes, Mr. Godfrey?" "My office. Bring the schedule." I grabbed my tablet and marched to the double doors. I knocked once and entered. Ryan was sitting at his massive desk, which was made of a single slab of petrified wood. He was wearing a fresh suit, but his tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck. He looked exhausted. Again. "Good morning," I said, keeping my distance. Since the incident, we had maintained a strict 3-foot radius. "You have a strategy meeting with Mason at 10, a lunch with the zoning commissioner at noon, and—" Ryan flinched. His hand flew up to his temple, rubbing it aggressively. "Stop," he hissed. I paused. "The schedule?" "No, that noise." He pointed at the ceiling. I listened. The office was dead silent. The soundproofing in this room was military grade. You couldn't hear a jet engine if it was outside the window. "I don't hear anything, sir." "It's whining, high-pitched, like a drill." Ryan stood up, pacing the room. He looked agitated. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated. He walked to the window, then back to the desk, like a caged animal. "It's been going on for hours." I watched him. His skin was pale, clammy. "Mr. Godfrey, are you feeling all right?" "I feel like my skin is too tight," he muttered, scratching at his collar. "And Mason is pushing for the vote again." "The vote?" "Nothing." He stopped pacing and looked at me. His eyes were dilated, the pupils huge. "Diana, I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "Get me tea, not the coffee, the herbal stuff you drink. Chamomile, valerian root, whatever puts you to sleep." "You want my sleepy time tea?" I asked, skeptical. Ryan Godfrey drank quadruple-shot espressos. "It tastes like dirt in old socks." "I don't care," he snapped. Then, softer. "Please, my head feels like it's going to split open." I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't just grumpy, he was in pain. Genuine, physical pain. "Okay," I said, my fixer mode engaging. "Sit down, close the blinds, I'll get the tea. And I'm adding honey because your blood sugar is probably low." Ryan actually obeyed. He sank into his chair and put his head in his hands. As I walked to the kitchenette, I frowned. First, the migraine in the boardroom. Now this auditory hallucination. And the way he was sweating. It wasn't drugs. I knew drugs. My ex-boyfriend had been a musician. I knew what withdrawal looked like. This was different. This looked like overstimulation. Like Ranger when we went to the fireworks show and he tried to dig a hole through the floorboards. I brewed the tea, watching the steam rise. "What is wrong with you, Ryan Godfrey?" I whispered to the empty room. I didn't know it then, but high above me, hidden inside the ventilation duct of Ryan's office, A small black box with a blinking red light was emitting a frequency of 18,000 hertz, silent to humans, but a screaming siren to the Alpha King. Chapter 4. The Vulture's Circle. While I was nursing the billionaire CEO with chamomile tea, the sharks were circling in the conference room down the hall. Mason Vaughn sat at the head of the secondary conference table, spinning a heavy gold pen between his fingers. He wasn't as large as Ryan. He was leaner, sharper, with hair that was styled to perfection and eyes that were a muddy hazel. "He canceled dinner," Mason said to the empty room. Or seemingly empty. From the shadows in the corner, a man stepped forward. It was Vance, the head of security. Vance was a wolf in every sense of the word. Thick neck, broken nose, knuckles scarred from years of fighting. "He's unstable, Mason," Vance rumbled. "I saw him in the elevator this morning." He snarled at his own reflection. "The staff is getting nervous. The pack is getting nervous." "Good," Mason said, slamming the pen down on the table. "Nervous is good. Nervous makes them look for a new leader." "But the human," Vance said, frowning. "The assistant, she's a problem." Mason laughed. "Diana? She's a glorified secretary. She brings him coffee and organizes his dry cleaning. She's irrelevant." "She calmed him down," Vance insisted. "In the boardroom. I smelled it. His scent changed. He went from kill to calm in 3 seconds. She touched him, Mason." Mason stopped laughing. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "She touched him?" "Behind the ear, like he was a pet." Mason was silent for a long moment. He tapped his finger on the table. "Ryan hates being touched," Mason murmured. "He hasn't let anyone touch him in years, not since the accident." "Well, he let her," Vance said. "And if she can keep him calm, your little frequency experiment might fail. You need him feral for the vote, Mason. If he walks into that meeting calm and collected, you lose. And if you lose, Ryan will rip your throat out for trying a coup." Mason stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray Seattle skyline. He adjusted his cufflinks. "She's just a human, Vance. A fragile, breakable human. If she's acting as his emotional crutch, then we simply kick the crutch away." "You want me to hurt her?" "No," Mason said, smiling that cold, shark smile again. "That would be messy. Ryan is possessive. If we hurt her, he'll rampage. No, we make him hurt her. We ramp up the frequency. We push him until he's so blind with rage he can't tell friend from foe." Mason turned back to Vance. "Turn the emitters up to level 5. Let's see how long the king can hold his crown when his brain is melting." Chapter 5. The Parking Garage. It was late, nearly 8 p.m., when I finally packed up my bag. The office was dark, save for the amber glow of the emergency lights. Ryan had been locked in his office for the last 4 hours, refusing to answer calls or emails. I knocked on his door. "Mr. Godfrey, I'm leaving for the night." No answer, just a low sound, like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor. "Ryan?" I called out, pressing my ear to the wood. "Go," a voice growled from inside. It sounded wrecked, hoarse. "Just go, Diana." "Do you need anything? Food? More tea?" "Go!" The shout was accompanied by the sound of glass shattering. I jumped back. "Okay, message received. He was having a tantrum." "Fine," I said to the door. "Have a nice night breaking things. I'll send the bill to accounting." I marched to the elevator, annoyed. Rich men and their egos. He was probably upset about the stock price or a bad haircut. I took the elevator down to the garage. It was empty, concrete, and echoing. My footsteps clicked loudly as I walked toward my blue Subaru. As I fished for my keys, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was that feeling you get when you're being watched. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing. Silence. Then, a scuff of a shoe. I turned around. Ryan was standing about 20 feet away, in the shadow of a concrete pillar. He looked terrible. His suit jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was torn at the shoulder. He was drenched in sweat, his hair matted to his forehead. He was swaying on his feet. "Ryan?" I dropped my keys. "My God, are you okay?" I started to run toward him. "Stay back," he gasped, holding out a hand. His fingers were curled into claws. Literally. His fingernails looked longer, sharper. "You're hurt," I said, ignoring him. I kept walking. "Did you get mugged? Did someone—" Ryan fell to his knees. He let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was a howl. A long, agonized sound of bones grinding together. I stopped 5 feet away. He looked up at me. His eyes were gone. There was no white, no gray, just 2 orbs of glowing, molten gold. And his teeth. I stared. His teeth were bared in a grimace of pain, and his canines were too long. Much too long. "Diana," he wheezed, his voice distorted, like 2 voices speaking at once. "Run, to your car, now!" "Ryan, you need a hospital," I said, my voice shaking. I was terrified, but my brain was scrambling for logic. "He's having a seizure. He's hallucinating." "I can't hold it," he groaned. He slammed his fist into the concrete floor. The concrete cracked. Spiderweb fractures spread out from his hand. I stared at the cracked concrete. No human could do that. "Run!" he roared. This time, I listened. I scrambled back, grabbed my keys, and unlocked my car. I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I looked out the window. Ryan was gone. In his place, a massive shadow moved in the darkness of the garage. It was huge, bigger than a man, 4-legged, and darker than the night. I blinked, and the shadow vanished, disappearing up the ramp toward the street. I sat there in my Subaru, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Okay," I whispered to the empty car. "Okay, maybe he is on drugs." But deep down, as I started the engine and gripped the steering wheel, I knew drugs didn't make your eyes glow gold. And drugs didn't make you crack concrete with your bare hands. I drove home, but I couldn't stop shaking, and I definitely didn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at me before he fell. He hadn't looked at me like a boss. He had looked at me like I was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. And the scary part? I wanted to go back and help him. Chapter 6. The Rationalization. I drove home on autopilot. My hands were gripping the steering wheel of my Subaru so hard that my knuckles were stark white against the leather. Concrete doesn't crack like that. The thought played on a loop in my head, keeping time with the rhythm of the windshield wipers slapping away the Seattle rain. Humans don't crack concrete with a single punch. Humans don't have eyes that turn into molten gold flashlights, and humans certainly don't vanish into thin air, leaving behind a shadow that looked like a prehistoric wolf. "He's on drugs," I said aloud to the empty car. "Experimental military-grade steroids. That's it. Ryan Godfrey is a junkie." But as I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, the lie tasted like ash. I knew what I had seen. I just didn't have a file folder in my brain to categorize it. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my legs feeling like jelly. As soon as I unlocked the door, a furry torpedo launched itself at me. "Oof! Down, Ranger! Down!" Ranger, my 75-pound Belgian Malinois, didn't listen. Usually, he was disciplined, a retired police canine who took command seriously. But tonight, he was frantic. He shoved his snout into my coat, whining high in his throat. He sniffed my hands, my hair, and then pressed his body against my legs, growling low at the door I had just closed. "What is it, buddy?" I asked, kneeling down to scratch his ears. He licked my hand, the same hand I had used to scratch Ryan's ear days ago. Then he stopped, his ears perked up, and he let out a sharp, confused woof. "You smell him, don't you?" I whispered. "You smell the crazy." I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, a large one. I sat on my couch, staring at my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Cale Godfrey. I ignored them. I opened Google instead. Symptoms of glowing yellow eyes. Can steroids cause superstrength? Billionaire CEO's Seattle occult rumors. The results were useless. Jaundice, contact lenses, Illuminati conspiracy forums. I tossed the phone aside and looked at Ranger. He was pacing by the window, staring out into the rain, his hackles raised. He was guarding me. "I should quit," I told him. I should email HR right now, effective immediately. No notice. Ranger looked at me, tilting his head. But we need the insurance, I sighed, rubbing my temples. Your hip surgery is next month, and the rent went up. I was trapped. I was the executive assistant to a man who might be a monster, or a super soldier, or just violently insane. And I was going back on Monday because I couldn't afford not to. Welcome to adulthood, Ranger, I muttered, taking a sip of wine, where the monsters are scary, but poverty is scarier. Chapter 7. The Uninvited Guest. Saturday morning arrived with a gray, gloomy persistence. I was in my pajamas, drinking coffee, and trying to pretend my life was normal when the buzzer rang. I checked the monitor. It was Cale Godfrey. Great, I groaned. The spare air. I buzzed him up, mostly because if I didn't, he looked like the type who would scale the balcony. Ranger was immediately on alert, standing by the door with a low, menacing rumble in his chest. Easy, Ranger. Guard, I commanded. Ranger sat, but his muscles were coiled like springs. When I opened the door, Cale was leaning against the frame, wearing a leather jacket that probably cost more than my car. He held up a box of donuts. Peace offering, he said, flashing that trademark Godfrey grin. Can I come in? Or will the land shark eat me? Depends on what you're here for, Cale, I said, not moving. Ryan sent me. I froze. Is he okay? He's alive. He's locked in his panic room, listening to Enya and icing his hand, but he's alive. Cale's eyes softened, losing the playful edge. He's worried he scared you, Diana. He cracked the floor, Cale, with his fist. Yeah, he has anger issues. It runs in the family. High testosterone, dense bones. Cale waved his hand vaguely. Look, can I come in? I promised him I'd check on you. I stepped back. Fine, but if you make sudden moves, Ranger will bite you. He's retired canine. He has a record. Cale stepped inside, eyeing Ranger warily. Ranger didn't growl. He walked up to Cale, sniffed his jeans aggressively, and then sneezed. He likes me, Cale declared, relaxing. Dogs love me. He sneezed. That means he thinks you smell like cheap cologne. Cale laughed and set the donuts on the counter. Look, Diana, Ryan is complicated. He has a condition. It flares up when he's stressed. The noise in the city, the pressure of the merger, it gets to him. A condition that makes his eyes glow? I crossed my arms. Cale hesitated, just for a split second. It's a rare ocular reaction to blood pressure. Listen, Ryan is a good man. He's just intense. He feels responsible for everyone. And you help him. I haven't seen him that calm in years. I scratched his ear, Cale. I didn't perform brain surgery. To him, it's the same thing. Cale leaned forward. Don't quit, please. If you quit, Mason wins. And if Mason wins, this company and my brother will fall apart. I looked at Cale. For all his jokes, he looked genuinely afraid. Who is Mason really? I asked. Why does Ryan hate him? Mason is the guy who waits for the lion to get sick so he can take over the pride, Cale said darkly. Just come in on Monday. Give Ryan a chance to apologize. I looked at Ranger. He was eating a donut hole Cale had, accidentally, dropped. Fine, I said, but if Ryan breaks any more concrete, I'm billing you for the therapy. Chapter 8. The Frequency. Monday morning at the summit felt different. The air was heavier. The usual quiet hum of the 50th floor felt brittle, like a violin string stretched to the breaking point. When I stepped off the elevator, I noticed the smell immediately. It wasn't the usual ozone in coffee. It was the scent of distress, sweat, musk, and something metallic. The office was empty. The other executives, Silas, Vance, the rest of the pack, as I privately called them, were gone. Their doors were shut. I walked to my desk. My phone was blinking with a message from Ryan. Do not come into my office. Cancel all meetings. Use the intercom only. I sat down, my stomach twisting. I pulled up the schedule and started canceling appointments. Mr. Godfrey has the flu, I told the Tokyo investors. Mr. Godfrey is contagious, I told the zoning commissioner. Around 10 a.m., Mason Vaughn walked by. He looked annoyingly fresh, wearing a navy suit and whistling a tune I didn't recognize. He stopped at my desk. "Morning, Diana. Quiet day?" "Mr. Godfrey is under the weather," I said professionally, not looking up. "Is he?" Mason leaned on my desk, invading my personal space. "Or is he losing it? I heard about the garage incident. Heavy repair bill for a patch of concrete." I stopped typing. I looked him in the eye. "It was a structural failure, Mr. Vaughn. The building is settling. Maybe you should have oversight look into the construction quality instead of bothering the assistants." Mason's eyes narrowed. For a second, his pupils looked weird, rectangular, like a goat or a shark. "Loyalty is a virtue, Diana," he murmured, "but don't go down with the ship. If Ryan becomes unfit, we'll need competent people to help with the transition." "I'll keep that in mind," I said coldly. He tapped my desk twice, tap, tap, and walked away. As soon as he left, a sound started, a low, vibrating hum. It was barely audible, right at the edge of my hearing. I rubbed my ears. It felt like pressure building in my sinuses. Bzzzt. I frowned. Was that the noise Ryan had complained about? To me, it was an annoyance, like a mosquito. But if Ryan had hearing that was sensitive enough to hear a whisper across a boardroom, this must be torture. I looked at the closed door of the penthouse office. I had to know. Chapter 9. The Glitch. By 2 p.m., the silence from Ryan's office was deafening. He hadn't asked for coffee. He hadn't asked for files. I needed his signature on the payroll authorization. If he didn't sign it by 3 p.m., 2,000 employees wouldn't get paid on Friday. I pressed the intercom button. "Mr. Godfrey?" Static. Then, a sound that made my blood freeze. A low, jagged whimper. "Ryan?" "Don't." His voice cut through the static, distorted and guttural. "Don't come in." "I need the payroll signature, Ryan. People need to eat." "Slide it under the door." I grabbed the folder and walked to the double doors. I crouched down to slide it under, but the gap was too small for the thick file. "It won't fit," I called out. "Leave it," he roared. Something heavy slammed against the door from the inside, shaking the frame. I flinched, but my temper flared. I was tired of the secrets. I was tired of the fear. I was the executive assistant, and I was going to get the damn payroll signed. "I am coming in," I announced. I typed my override code into the keypad. 0429. The lock clicked. "Diana, no!" I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark. The blackout shades were drawn. The air was freezing, so cold I could see my breath. The furniture was overturned. The heavy leather chairs were shredded, stuffing scattered like snow. And sitting behind the massive petrified wood desk was a monster. Ryan was hunched over. His shirt was in tatters, hanging off his frame in ribbons. His skin looked wrong, rippling, like something was moving underneath it. Patches of dark, thick fur covered his forearms and climbed up his neck. He looked up. His face was a roadmap of agony. His jaw was unhinged, too wide, his teeth elongated into terrifying fangs. His eyes were burning gold. "I told you," he snarled, his voice a dual-tone harmonic of man and beast, "to run." I stood there, clutching the payroll folder. My brain was screaming, "Predator!" but my heart was doing something else. It was breaking. He didn't look like he wanted to attack me. He looked like he was fighting a war inside his own skin. Chapter 10. The Reveal. I should have run. Any sane person would have run. But I had Ranger, and living with a traumatized canine had taught me one thing. You don't run from fear. You face it. "You look terrible," I said. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. Ryan, or the creature that was Ryan, clutched the edge of the desk. His claws, thick black daggers, gouged deep grooves into the wood. "Get out," he wheezed. "Can't control it." "Control what?" I took a step forward, my eyes scanning the fur on his arms, the way his spine was hunched. Ryan, what is happening to you? Is this a reaction to something? The beast! He roared. The sound hit me like a physical blow, blowing my hair back. I stopped. My brain stalled. Beast? I looked at him. Really looked at him. The raw meat diet, the pack mentality, the growling, the concrete he cracked, the way Ranger, a dog who hated everyone, submitted to him. The pieces were there, but the picture they made was impossible. Ryan, I whispered, my voice barely audible. What are you? Ryan stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked like he was waiting for the scream, the panic. I'm not human, he managed to choke out, his voice distorted by the lengthening of his jaw. I am Wolf. I stared at him. A wolf? I let out a short, hysterical laugh. It bubbled up in my chest, unbidden. You mean, like a werewolf? Like in the movies? Yes, he snarled, slashing the desk again as a spasm of pain hit him. That's impossible, I said, clutching the folder to my chest. Werewolves aren't real. You're sick. Or hallucinating. And now I'm hallucinating. Diana! He lunged forward, but caught himself, gripping the desk until it splintered. Look at me. Does this look like a hallucination? I looked at the claws. I looked at the glowing gold eyes. I looked at the fur rippling over human skin. Denial crashed into reality. Okay, I breathed, my legs shaking violently. Okay, you're a werewolf. That is actually happening. I looked at the folder in my hand, then at him. Can you hold a pen? I asked. Ryan blinked. The gold in his eyes flickered, revealing a sliver of gray human iris. He looked completely baffled by the question. What? The payroll, I said, walking toward the desk. My legs felt like lead, and every instinct was screaming predator, but I kept moving. 2,000 people need checks, Ryan. Werewolf or not, you are still the CEO. Diana, I could kill you, he growled, watching me approach with terrified fascination. I could snap you like a twig. But you won't, I said, my voice trembling, because Ranger likes you, and Ranger is a better judge of character than I am. I reached the desk. I opened the folder and placed it on the only patch of wood that wasn't clawed to shreds. I uncapped the pen. I held it out to him. Ryan looked at the pen, then he looked at me. He slowly, agonizingly lifted his hand. It was a paw, huge, covered in fur, with lethal claws. But as he focused on me, on my steady breathing, the fur began to recede. The bones cracked and shifted. The paw shrank back into a large, scarred human hand. He took the pen. His hand was trembling violently. You are, he rasped, staring at me with awe, the most insane human I have ever met. Just sign the line, Cujo, I whispered. He signed it. The moment the pen left the paper, the pen snapped in half in his grip. Ink exploded over his hand. He slumped back in his chair, exhausted. What are you doing here, Diana? He asked softly. I scratched your ear, I said, wiping a spot of ink off the desk. And you liked it, and my dog likes you. And honestly, the job market is terrible right now. Ryan closed his eyes. A dry, rasping laugh escaped his throat. You have no idea what you've just walked into. Maybe not, I said, picking up the signed folder. But someone has to run this company while you're howling at the moon. Now, do you want the herbal tea, or do you want a raw steak? Ryan opened his eyes. The gold was fading, but the intensity was still there. Steak, he said. Rare. And Diana? Yes? Lock the door on your way out, and don't let Mason in. Consider it done. I walked out of the office, my heels clicking on the floor. I made it to my desk, sat down, and calmly placed the folder in the outbox. Then, I put my head between my knees and hyperventilated for a full minute. My boss is a werewolf. I took a deep breath. Well, I thought, straightening my blazer, at least he's not a Republican. Chapter 11. The Non-Disclosure Agreement. The next morning, I walked into the summit with a large coffee in one hand and a freshly drafted contract in the other. The 50th floor was eerily quiet. The shredded leather chairs from yesterday had already been replaced. The deep gouges in the mahogany desk had been sanded down and varnished, though the wood still looked slightly uneven. It seemed the janitorial staff here was used to cleaning up accidents that involved claws. Ryan was standing by the window, looking out at the gray Seattle skyline. He was wearing a fresh suit, navy blue this time, tailored to perfection to hide the massive muscles that I now knew could crack concrete. He turned as I entered. He looked wary, like a dog that knows it chewed up the sofa and is waiting to see if it's getting the newspaper or a treat. "You came back," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I did," I said, setting my coffee down. "But we need to have a talk, Mr. Godfrey, about the job description." Ryan walked toward the desk, keeping his hands clasped behind his back. "Diana, about yesterday." "I've prepared an addendum to my contract," I interrupted, sliding the paper across the desk. "If I am going to be the executive assistant to what is the PC term? Lycanthrope? Shifter?" "Werewolf is fine," he muttered, glancing at the paper. "Right. If I am going to be the EA to a werewolf, I require a 20% raise. Hazard pay. Also, full dental coverage for Ranger. And if you ever growl at me before I've had my morning coffee, I walk." Ryan stared at the paper. He looked baffled. "You saw me turn into a monster, Diana. You saw me destroy my office. And your reaction is to ask for a raise?" "My reaction is to secure my financial future," I corrected. "Also, I did some Googling last night. Apparently, alphas are possessive and protective, which means you're statistically the safest boss in Seattle to work for, provided you don't eat me." Ryan flinched. "I don't eat people, Diana." "Good. That's clause number 4. A slow, incredulous smile spread across Ryan's face. It changed his whole demeanor. The brooding darkness lifted, revealing a man who was shockingly handsome when he wasn't in pain. "Done," he said, reaching for a pen. He hesitated, looking at the pen, then at me. "Do you have a metal one? I tend to break the plastic." I pulled a heavy steel tactical pen from my bag and handed it to him. He signed the paper with a flourish. "So," he said, handing it back, "we have a deal. You manage my schedule, and I try not to turn into a wolf during board meetings." "Exactly," I said, filing the paper away. "Now sit down. You look pale, and I can hear that buzzing sound again." Ryan froze, his eyes sharpened instantly. "You can hear it?" "Barely. It sounds like a dying fluorescent light, or a mosquito inside a wall." I tapped my ear. "It's faint, but it's annoying. Is that what sets you off?" "To me," Ryan said, his voice tightening, "it sounds like a dentist drill being driven into my eardrum. It's relentless." I looked at him. The migraines, the irritability. It wasn't biology, it was torture. "Then we find it," I said firmly. "But first, you need protein. You look like you're about to faint, and I refuse to carry a 300-pound wolf to the break room." Chapter 12. The Feeding. I had never bought a raw steak for a billionaire before. I walked down to the executive kitchen on the 48th floor. It was a sterile, stainless steel wonderland, stocked with things I assumed only CrossFitters ate. I bypassed the kale chips and opened the meat fridge. There they were, massive, vacuum-sealed ribeyes, labeled grass-fed, alpha grade. I grabbed 2. I felt ridiculous. I felt like I was preparing lunch for a tiger at the zoo. I put them on a plate, no garnish, no sides, just raw red meat, and carried them back up the private elevator. When I entered the office, Ryan was slumped in his chair, rubbing his temples. The air around him shimmered with heat. "Lunch!" I announced, placing the plate on his desk. Ryan looked at the raw meat. Then he looked at me. His nostrils flared, inhaling the scent. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gray irises until his eyes were almost entirely black. "I can't eat this in front of you," he murmured, gripping the armrests of his chair. "It's primal. It's not polite." "Ryan, I pick up my dog's poop with a plastic bag. I think I can handle watching you eat a steak." I sat in the chair opposite him and crossed my legs. "Eat! You're shaking!" He was. The tremors were back in his hands. He reached for the steak. He didn't use a fork. He picked it up with his hand. The moment the meat touched his lips, the human veneer cracked. He didn't chew politely. He tore into it. It was efficient, savage, and terrifyingly fast. I watched, fascinated. It should have been gross. Instead, it was oddly mesmerizing. It was pure power. He decimated 2 pounds of beef in under a minute. As he finished, he let out a long breath. The color returned to his face. The shaking stopped. The tension in his shoulders dropped. He looked at his hand, covered in blood, then at me. He looked ashamed. "There," he said roughly, grabbing a napkin and scrubbing his hand. "Happy?" "Immensely," I said, handing him a wet wipe from my purse. "You look less like you're going to murder the zoning commissioner." "The zoning commissioner is safe," Ryan grunted. "For now." He leaned back, looking at me with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "Why are you doing this, Diana? Most humans would have run. Kale said you were terrified in the garage." "I was," I admitted. "But Ranger, my dog, he trusts you. And Ranger hates everyone. If he thinks you're okay, then you're okay. Besides," I looked at the vent in the ceiling, where I could hear the faint, high-pitched bzzzt. "I don't like bullies," I said, "and someone is bullying you with that noise. I intend to find out who." Ryan went still. "You think someone is doing this on purpose?" "Machines don't just hum at a frequency that specifically hurts werewolves, Ryan. That's not a glitch. That's a weapon." Chapter 13. The Investigation. The rest of the week became a game of Hunt the Hum. While Ryan dealt with the corporate fallout of his medical leave, I spent my downtime walking the perimeter of the 50th floor. I looked like I was checking inventory or organizing files, but really, I was listening. The sound wasn't constant. It pulsed. It was loudest in Ryan's office. It was moderate in the hallway. It was non-existent in the elevator. "It's definitely localized," I muttered to myself on Thursday afternoon, standing on a chair in the conference room to inspect a vent. "Looking for a raise up there?" I nearly fell off the chair. I turned to see Mason Vaughn leaning against the doorway. Mason, Ryan's cousin, the man with the shark smile and the rectangular pupils I had sworn I saw days ago. "Checking the dust filters," I lied smoothly, climbing down. "Mr. Godfrey's allergies are acting up." "Ah, allergies." Mason walked into the room. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace that was different from Ryan's heavy, powerful stalk. Mason moved like water. "Is that what we're calling it? I heard he was barking at the moon again." "He has a sinus infection, Mr. Vaughn." I smoothed my skirt. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Just dropping off the revised merger documents." He tossed a file onto the table. "Though I doubt he'll be lucid enough to read them. The vote is on Monday, Diana. You might want to update your resume." He smiled. As he did, he reached into his pocket and clicked something on his key fob. Spike. The sound in my head went from a mosquito buzz to a wasp sting. A sharp, high-pitched squeal that made my teeth ache. I flinched, instinctively bringing a hand to my ear. Mason's eyes flicked to my hand, then to my face. "Headache?" he asked softly. Too softly. "Just the weather," I managed, lowering my hand. He clicked the fob again. The spike vanished, returning to the low hum. "Well," Mason said, turning to leave, "take some aspirin. It's going to be a loud weekend." I watched him go. My heart was pounding. He had a remote. He had a literal remote control for the noise. I grabbed the file he left and ran to Ryan's office. "Ryan," I said, bursting in, "it's Mason!" Ryan looked up from his computer. "What?" "Mason! He has a fob! He clicked it and the noise spiked. I heard it! I felt it!" Ryan stood up, a low growl building in his chest. "I'll kill him." "No!" I blocked his path. "You can't! If you attack him without proof, you prove the feral clause. You give him exactly what he wants. We need the device." Chapter 14. The Scratch, Round 2. Ryan was vibrating. The news about Mason had sent him into a tailspin. He was pacing the length of the office, his hands opening and closing into fists. The air smelled of ozone, burning electricity. "I have to stop him," Ryan snarled. "He's trying to steal my pack." "He's baiting you," I argued. "Sit down, Ryan. You're shifting. Your claws are out." They were. Sharp, black talons were digging into his palms, drawing blood. "I can't. Calm down," he gasped. He leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. The noise. It's so loud right now. It's screaming. I knelt in front of him. I didn't care about the claws. I didn't care about the teeth. I saw the man. "Ryan," I said softly, "look at me." He shook his head. "Run, Diana, it hurts." "I'm not running." I reached out. I placed one hand on his knee to steady myself, and with the other, I reached behind his head. I found the spot, that soft, silky patch of hair right behind the left ear. I scratched, hard. The effect was instantaneous. Ryan gasped, a sound that was half sob, half groan. His head fell forward onto my shoulder. His heavy arms came up, wrapping around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest. Thump, 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 thump. His left leg kicked out, thumping rhythmically against the floorboards. "Don't stop," he mumbled into my neck. He inhaled deeply, smelling me. "You smell like vanilla and rain. And you smell like expensive cologne and dog," I whispered, continuing the rhythm. "Just breathe." He buried his face in the crook of my neck. The tension drained out of him. He was heavy, warm, and solid. For a moment, the lines between boss and employee didn't just blur, they vanished. I felt his heart rate slow down against my chest. "You ground me," he whispered, his voice thick with sleepiness. "Why do you ground me?" "Because I'm the only one who isn't afraid of you," I said. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look me in the eyes. His eyes were gray again, clear, intense. "You should be," he said. "I am a monster, Diana." "You're a big puppy with anger management issues," I corrected, my hand still resting on his neck. He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing. "If we survive this vote," he murmured, "I am going to buy you a Subaru dealership." I laughed. "Just the raise is fine, Ryan." Chapter 15, The Vent. Friday afternoon. The office was closing down for the weekend. The vote was Monday morning. We had 48 hours to find the device. "It has to be in the ventilation," I said, standing on Ryan's desk, with my shoes off out of respect for the petrified wood. "The sound carries through the air ducts." Ryan was standing below me, holding my ankles to steady me. His hands were warm and large. "I've had sweeps done," Ryan said. "Vance checked for bugs, cameras, microphones. He found nothing." "Vance was looking for technology," I said, unscrewing the vent cover with the screwdriver I had borrowed from maintenance. "Mason isn't using standard tech. He's using... Wait." I pulled the heavy metal grate down and handed it to Ryan. I shone my phone's flashlight into the dark tunnel of the duct. Nothing. Just dust and metal. "See?" Ryan sighed. "Empty." "Wait," I squinted. "Ranger does this thing where he hides his toys behind the couch cushion, not under it." I reached my hand deep into the duct, feeling along the inner lip of the metal, right where the vent met the wall. My fingers brushed against something cold. Plastic. "Gotcha," I whispered. I pulled. It was stuck with magnetic tape. I yanked harder. It came free. I pulled my hand out. Resting in my palm was a black box, no bigger than a deck of cards. It had a single red light blinking on the side. Bzzzt. Bzzzt. "Is that it?" Ryan asked, his voice deadly quiet. "It is," I said. "And look at the logo on the back." I shone the light on the device. Stamped into the black plastic was a small, stylized symbol, a silver fin. "Vaughn Technologies," Ryan growled. The sound rumbled through his chest and up into my feet. "Mason." "We have him," I said, grinning down at the Alpha King. "We have the proof. Now help me down, because I'm about to plan a coup." Ryan lifted me down by the waist as easily as if I were a doll. He didn't let go immediately when my feet hit the floor. He held the device in one hand and me in the other. "Diana," he said seriously, "if we expose him, he will challenge me. It won't just be a vote, it will be a fight." "Good," I said, smoothing his lapel. "I've seen you punch concrete. I like our odds." Ryan looked at the device, then at me. A slow, feral grin spread across his face, the first real smile I had seen in months. "Let's go to war." Chapter 16, The War Room. We left the summit like thieves in the night, though I suppose it's hard to look like a thief when you're walking out the front door with the CEO. Ryan carried the black box, the Von Tech emitter, in his pocket like it was a grenade. His hand never left it. I carried my purse, which now contained the most dangerous contract in corporate history. "We can't talk here," Ryan murmured as we stepped into the private elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing us in silence. If there was one device in my office, there could be microphones in the lobby. "Where are we going?" I asked, checking my watch. It was 6 p.m. on a Friday. Usually, I'd be home watching true crime documentaries with Ranger. My apartment isn't secure. The walls are paper thin, and my neighbor listens to techno music at all hours. "My place," Ryan said. The elevator reached the garage. "It's off the grid. No smart devices. No Wi-Fi. Just stone and timber." We walked to his car. I expected the usual black SUV, but Ryan walked past the lineup of armored vehicles to a sleek, charcoal gray Aston Martin. It looked fast, expensive, and completely impractical for a man of his size. "You fit in that?" I asked, skeptical. "It was custom modified," he grunted, opening the passenger door for me. "Get in. We need to get off the frequency before my headache comes back." The drive was silent but tense. Ryan drove with an aggressive precision, weaving through Seattle traffic like the other cars were standing still. As we left the city limits and climbed into the heavily wooded hills of the Pacific Northwest, I saw the tension in his shoulders finally start to unspool. "The logo," I said, breaking the silence. "The silver fin. Is Mason... does he like fishing?" Ryan's hands tightened on the leather steering wheel. "Mason isn't a wolf, Diana." I blinked. "I thought you were cousins." "We are. Distant cousins. The shifter gene is... volatile. It adapts." Ryan glanced at me, his eyes glowing faintly in the dashboard lights. "My family are wolves, pack hunters, territorial. Mason's branch of the family, they are older, colder." "Shark?" I guessed, remembering the rectangular pupils I had seen in the office. "Is he a wereshark?" "We don't call them that," Ryan said, navigating a hairpin turn. "They are the Salachi. Solitary, opportunistic. They don't have packs, they have feeding frenzies. And they don't understand loyalty, they only understand blood in the water." I shivered. "So, we are dealing with a great white in a bespoke suit." "Worse," Ryan said, pulling up to a massive iron gate that swung open automatically. "We are dealing with a megalodon who wants my territory." The car crunched over a gravel driveway lined with towering pines. We emerged into a clearing, and I gasped. Ryan's place wasn't a house. It was a fortress of glass and dark timber, cantilevered over the edge of a waterfall. It was beautiful, wild, and terrified me slightly. "Welcome to the den," Ryan said, killing the engine. "Don't wander into the woods. The perimeter security is... lethal." "Lethal to humans or lethal to squirrels?" I asked, grabbing my bag. "Lethal to anything that isn't me," he said, opening my door. He offered me his hand. His palm was warm, calloused, and engulfing. "Stick close to me, Diana. You're safe as long as you're in my scent." I took his hand. "Well, lead the way, Cujo. We have a war to plan." Chapter 17, The Safe House. The interior of Ryan's home was exactly what I expected. Savage luxury. The floors were heated slate. The walls were raw, living rock that had been incorporated into the architecture. A fire was already roaring in a fireplace large enough to roast a whole ox. There were no televisions, no computers, no blinking lights, just heavy leather furniture, thousands of books, and the sound of the waterfall crashing below. "Make yourself comfortable," Ryan said, taking off his suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing thick forearms corded with muscle. I need to secure the evidence. He walked to a wall safe hidden behind a tapestry, punched in a code, and locked the Von Tech emitter inside. Are you hungry? He asked, turning back to me. I can cook, or I can hunt something, but that tends to upset guests. Cook, please, I said quickly. I prefer my food to not have a face when I meet it. Ryan actually chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that did funny things to my stomach. He went into the kitchen, which was an industrial-grade masterpiece of copper and steel. I sat at the kitchen island, watching him. There was something incredibly domestic about watching the Alpha King chop vegetables. He moved with a speed and precision that was terrifying, his knife a blur, but he treated the ingredients with respect. So, I said, accepting a glass of red wine he slid toward me. Monday, the vote. Mason will move to trigger the feral clause immediately, Ryan said, searing 3 massive steaks in a cast-iron pan. He will claim I am mentally unstable. He will show footage of me in the garage. He will have witness statements. And we will show them the box, I countered. It's not enough, Ryan said, flipping the steaks. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air. The board respects strength, Diana. If I walk in there looking weak, looking like a victim who needed his assistant to save him, they might vote me out anyway. A king cannot be a victim. You won't look like a victim, I said, swirling my wine. You will look like a king who uncovered a traitor. Ryan stopped cooking. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He looked at me with that intense, gold-flecked gaze. You don't get it, he said softly. To them, you are a weakness, a human. If they know I rely on you to keep me calm, they will target you. Mason has already threatened you. Mason threatened my job, I said, not my life. To a shark, they are the same thing. Ryan walked around the island, invading my personal space. He smelled of wood smoke, searing meat, and raw power. He placed his hands on the counter on either side of me, trapping me. I can't let you walk into that boardroom on Monday, Diana. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm the one who found the box, Ryan. I'm the one who knows the frequency. You need me. I need you safe, he growled, leaning down until his nose brushed my hair. He inhaled deeply. You have become important. I have a contract, I whispered, refusing to back down, even though my knees were shaking. And hazard pay. I'm going. Ryan stared at me. Then, slowly, he thumped his forehead against mine. Stubborn, he murmured. Fine, but you wear my jacket, you carry my scent, and if Mason looks at you, I remove his eyes. Deal, I breathed. He pulled back, his eyes dark. Good. Now eat your steak before I decide to eat it for you. Chapter 18. The Shark in the Water. Saturday morning brought rain and Cale Godfrey. I was sitting on Ryan's massive deck, drinking coffee and watching the mist roll over the forest when I heard the roar of an engine. A bright red Ferrari tore up the gravel driveway, sliding sideways to a stop next to Ryan's Aston Martin. Cale hopped out, wearing sunglasses despite the gray weather. Morning, campers, he shouted, bounding up the steps. I brought bagels and tactical gear. In that order. Ryan stepped out of the house, holding a mug of coffee the size of a soup bowl. He looked rested for the first time in weeks. The dark circles were gone. You're loud, Cale, Ryan grunted. And you're alive! Cale slapped Ryan on the back, then winked at me. And Diana is still in one piece. I assume the slumber party was PG-13? We were strategizing, I said, ignoring the heat rising in my cheeks. Ryan filled me in on the family tree, specifically the aquatic branch. Cale stopped smiling. He took off his sunglasses. He told you about the Salachi? He gave me the terrifying highlights in the car, I said, suppressing a shiver. Sharks, solitary, no guilt. It explains why Mason has eyes like a doll. Mason is a hybrid, Cale explained, sitting down at the outdoor table and opening a box of bagels. His mother was a Godfrey wolf. His father was Vaughn, a great white shifter from the Pacific clan. Mason got the shark instincts and the wolf ambition. It's a bad mix. Sharks don't feel guilt, Diana. They physically can't. Which is why he has no problem torturing his own cousin with sound waves, I said. Ryan says they don't have a pack? They have feeding frenzies, Ryan corrected, sitting down. Mason doesn't want to lead the company. He wants to consume it. Great, I muttered. So we're dealing with a corporate megalodon. Ryan looked at me. We need a plan for the entry. Mason will have security at the door. Vance is loyal to strength, but Mason has been poisoning his ear. Vance is a good dog, Cale said, chewing a bagel. He just needs to know who the alpha is. If you walk in there radiating power, Vance will fold. I can't radiate power if I'm holding my head because of the noise, Ryan pointed out. Mason will have the remote in his pocket. He'll crank it to max the second I step in. I set my coffee down. Then we don't let him use the remote. Both brothers looked at me. How? Cale asked. Pickpocket him? No, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. We jam it. Jam it? Ryan frowned. I looked up the Von Tech specs online last night, I explained. Ryan told me the logo was Von Tech, so I did some digging. The emitters operate on a specific radio frequency. If we broadcast a stronger signal on the same channel, we can drown out the command from the remote. It's called constructive interference. Cale stared at me. You want to hack the shark? I want to blast pop music on his frequency, I corrected. I downloaded a looping track of Baby Shark. It seemed appropriate. Ryan looked at me. For a second, he looked stunned. Then, he threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that echoed off the trees. She's brilliant, Ryan said, wiping a tear from his eye. She's actually brilliant. I like her, Cale declared. Can we keep her? Mom would love her. Focus, Ryan growled, but he was smiling. He looked at me with a warmth that made the damp morning air feel tropical. Okay, Diana, we jam the signal, we walk in, then what? Then, I said, you let the wolf out, just enough to remind them why you're the king. Chapter 19. The Calm Before the Storm. Sunday night felt like the air before a tornado. The pressure was low, heavy, and electrifying. We had spent the weekend prepping. Cale had set up the signal jammer, a modified radio transmitter we rigged from spare parts in Ryan's garage. I had ironed Ryan's suit. Ryan had spent hours meditating, or whatever wolves do, staring into the fire to center his beast. At 10 p.m., I couldn't sleep. I walked out into the main living area. Ryan was standing by the fireplace, staring at the flames. He was shirtless. I stopped. I tried very hard to be professional, but the man was built like a Greek statue carved out of granite. Scars crisscrossed his back, old battle wounds, I assumed. You should be sleeping, he said without turning around. Nerves, I admitted, walking closer. Big day tomorrow. He turned. The firelight danced over his skin, highlighting the definition of his chest and abdomen. He looked wild, dangerous. Come here, he said softly. I walked to him. He reached out and took my hands. His hands were hot, trembling slightly. Tomorrow might get ugly, he said. If the jammer fails, if I lose control, I need you to run. Don't try to save me, just get Cale and go. The jammer won't fail, I said firmly, and I'm not leaving you. Why? He pulled me closer until my toes bumped his bare feet. Why are you so loyal, Diana? I'm a nightmare. You're not a nightmare, I whispered. You're just loud. He chuckled softly. Then his expression turned serious. He lifted one hand and cupped my cheek. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone, rough but gentle. You anchor me, he murmured. When the noise is screaming, when the wolf wants to tear the world apart, I smell you, and it stops. You are the quiet in the storm. My breath hitched. Ryan! He leaned down. His eyes were molten gold, but I wasn't scared. I was magnetized. I want to kiss you, he rasped, his voice dropping to that sub-bass growl. But if I start, I won't stop. And we have a war to win tomorrow. I stood on my tiptoes. I placed my hand on his chest, right over his heart. It was beating slow, heavy, and strong. Win the war first, I whispered. Then we can talk about what happens next. He closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against mine. We stood there for a long time, the fire crackling beside us, two different species finding a common rhythm in the dark. "Go to sleep, Diana," he finally whispered, stepping back. "Because tomorrow, we take back the kingdom." I went to my room, but I touched my cheek where his hand had been. My skin was still tingling. Chapter 20. The Walk-In. Monday morning, 8:55 a.m. The hallway leading to the boardroom was silent. The staff had cleared out, sensing the impending violence. I stood next to Ryan in front of the double doors. He looked magnificent. He was wearing a black three-piece suit that cost more than my college tuition. His hair was tamed, his jaw freshly shaven. He radiated power. Cold, controlled, absolute power. But I saw his hand twitching at his side. "You ready?" I whispered, clutching my purse, which contained the jammer. "Ready," he said. He looked at me. "Signal?" I reached into my bag and flipped the switch on the jammer. A tiny green light blinked on. Somewhere in the ether, Baby Shark was blasting on 18,000 hertz. "Signal is live," I said. Ryan nodded. He reached out and pushed the doors open with both hands. Bang! The doors flew open, hitting the stops with a crack like a gunshot. The boardroom was full. Mason sat at the head of the table, Ryan's seat. The 12 board members were seated around him. Vance, the head of security, stood in the corner, looking grim. Mason looked up. He smiled that shark smile. "Ryan," Mason said smoothly, "so glad you could join us. We were just discussing your severance package." Ryan didn't speak. He walked into the room. He didn't walk, he prowled. Every step was heavy, deliberate. Mason's hand slipped into his pocket. I saw his fingers twitch. He was clicking the remote. Nothing happened. Ryan didn't flinch. He didn't stumble. He kept walking. Mason's smile faltered. He clicked the remote again, frantically this time. Ryan stopped at the foot of the table. He looked at the board members, one by one. They shrank back in their seats, unable to meet his gaze. "Get out of my chair, Mason," Ryan said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, resonant command that vibrated in the glass of water on the table. "You're unwell, Ryan," Mason stammered, clicking the remote furiously inside his pocket. "You're unstable. The feral claws." "I feel fine," Ryan said, stepping closer. "In fact, I feel excellent. Do you know why?" I stepped out from behind Ryan. I pulled the black Von Tech box from my purse and slammed it onto the obsidian table. Clack. "Because we found your toy," I announced, my voice ringing out clearly. The board members looked at the box, then at Mason. Mason's face went pale. His rectangular pupils blew wide. "Vance," Ryan said, not looking away from Mason. "Lock the doors." Vance looked at Ryan. He smelled the alpha power rolling off him in waves. He looked at Mason, who was sweating. Vance grinned, showing a mouthful of very sharp teeth. "With pleasure, Alpha," Vance rumbled. The lock clicked shut. Mason stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is a setup. That box isn't mine." "Really?" I asked, pointing to the jammer in my hand. "Because when I turn this off..." I flipped the switch on my jammer. Instantly, the black box on the table lit up red. A high-pitched squeal filled the room. The board members, all wolves, clapped their hands over their ears, wincing. Ryan flinched, his eyes flashing gold, but he held his ground. "Turn it off!" one of the board members shouted. "Mason has the remote," I said calmly. "Ask him." All eyes turned to Mason. Ryan smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had cornered a rabbit. "Well, cousin," Ryan growled, "it seems you have the floor." Chapter 21. The Frequency of War. The noise in the boardroom was agonizing. Even with my human ears, the high-pitched shriek of the Von Tech emitter was like a needle piercing my eardrum. For the board members, 12 powerful alpha werewolves, it was torture. They were doubled over, clutching their heads, groaning in a collective harmony of pain. "Turn it off!" Silas, the VP of Operations, roared, slamming his fist onto the table. "Make it stop!" "Ask Mason!" I shouted over the din, my hand hovering over the switch on my jammer. He has the remote! All eyes turned to Mason Vaughn. The head of oversight was standing at the head of the table, his face a mask of pale fury. He was clicking the fob in his pocket frantically, but nothing was happening because the emitter was already live and screaming, stuck in a feedback loop. "It's not mine," Mason lied, though his voice cracked. "She planted it! The human planted it!" Ryan took a step forward. He was the only wolf not cowering. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek, and his eyes were flashing that dangerous molten gold, but he was standing tall. He was enduring the pain through sheer force of will. "Diana," Ryan growled, his voice low and deadly. "Jam it." I flipped the switch on my device. Click! Instantly, the screeching stopped. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy and ringing. The red light on the Von Tech box went dark. The board members gasped, slumping back in their chairs, wiping sweat from their foreheads. The relief was palpable. "Now," Ryan said, the silence amplifying his deep voice. "Let's look at the evidence. The device was found in my office. It is stamped with the Von Tech logo. And when my assistant jammed the signal, Mason tried to override it." Ryan walked around the table, stalking toward Mason. "You wanted to prove I was feral," Ryan said softly. "You wanted to break my mind so you could steal my throne. But you forgot one thing, cousin." Mason backed up until he hit the floor-to-ceiling window. His shark-like composure was cracking. His skin took on a gray, sickly pallor. "What did I forget?" Mason spat, his eyes narrowing into vertical slits. "You forgot that a king doesn't need to be sane to kill a traitor," Ryan said. "He just needs to be angry." "You can't touch me," Mason sneered, though he looked terrified. "The feral clause protects me. If you attack me, you prove you're unstable." "I'm not attacking you because I'm crazy," Ryan said, unbuttoning his suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. He loosened his tie. "I'm attacking you because you threatened my mate." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mate. He had said it. Out loud. In front of the board. In front of me. Mason's eyes flicked to me. He saw the shock on my face, and in that split second, the predator in him made a calculation. He couldn't beat Ryan, but he could hurt the thing Ryan cared about. "Mate?" Mason laughed, a wet, rasping sound. "You mated a human secretary? Then let's see if she bleeds like one." Mason didn't lunge at Ryan. He lunged at me. Chapter 22. Blood in the Water. It happened in slow motion. Mason's suit seemed to burst at the seams. He didn't shift into a wolf. He shifted into something wrong. His skin turned the color of wet slate. His jaw unhinged, revealing row upon row of serrated triangular teeth. His eyes rolled back, turning pure, lifeless black. He was a blur of gray muscle and teeth, flying across the mahogany table straight for my throat. I didn't have time to scream. I raised the jammer like a pathetic shield, bracing for impact. "Roar!" A shadow intercepted him. Ryan didn't shift fully. There wasn't time. He hit Mason in a half-shift, a massive, hulking figure with claws the size of steak knives. They collided in midair with the sound of a car crash. They slammed into the conference table. The obsidian wood, solid enough to stop a bullet, shattered. Wood splinters and glass from water pitchers exploded outward like shrapnel. "Stay back!" Vance shouted, pulling me away from the blast zone. I scrambled backward, clutching my purse. On the floor, amidst the wreckage of the table, two monsters were trying to kill each other. Mason was slippery, fast, and vicious. He bit into Ryan's shoulder, shaking his head like a shark tearing a seal. Blood, bright red, sprayed onto the carpet. Ryan didn't flinch. He let out a roar that shook the light fixtures and buried his claws into Mason's side. He lifted the shark hybrid and slammed him into the floor. Crack! The concrete beneath the carpet fractured. "You!" Ryan roared, punching Mason in the face. "Do not touch her!" With every word, a fist came down. It was brutal. It was primal. It was the savage luxury of the boardroom turned into a slaughterhouse. Mason thrashed, his tail, a thick gray appendage that had ripped through his trousers, whipping around, smashing chairs. He managed to slash Ryan's chest, ripping the white dress shirt to ribbons. But Ryan was an alpha. And not just any alpha. He was the king for a reason. Ryan caught Mason's throat in one hand. He squeezed. Mason gagged, his black eyes bulging. He clawed at Ryan's arm, but Ryan didn't budge. He lifted Mason off the ground, choking the air out of him. "Yield," Ryan snarled, his face inches from the shark thing's snout. "Or I mount your head on the wall next to the elk." Mason gurgled. He went limp. His gray skin began to recede, the rows of teeth shrinking back into a human mouth. Ryan dropped him. Mason hit the floor, gasping, naked, bruised, and human again. Ryan stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his shoulder and chest. He looked terrifying. He looked magnificent. He turned to the board members, who were pressed against the walls, wide-eyed. "Well?" Ryan panted, wiping blood from his lip. "Are we voting?" Chapter 23. The Vote. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The only sound was Mason's wet, wheezing breaths from the floor and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Ryan stood in the center of the debris, his clothes in tatters. He was bleeding from a dozen bite marks, but he didn't look weak. He looked like a god of war who had just cleared the battlefield. I walked forward. My legs were shaking, but I forced them to move. I picked up Ryan's discarded suit jacket from the chair where he had tossed it. I walked up to him and draped it over his shoulders. "Cover up, Cujo," I whispered, my voice trembling only slightly. "You're scaring the shareholders." Ryan looked down at me. The gold in his eyes faded, replaced by that warm steel gray. He pulled the jacket tight, hiding the worst of the gore. "Are you hurt?" he asked, ignoring his own wounds. "I'm fine. You're the one who needs stitches." I turned to the board. "Gentlemen, the motion on the floor is the removal of Mason Vaughn for corporate sabotage, attempted murder, and being a terrible cousin. Do I hear a second?" Vance, the head of security, stepped forward. He kicked Mason's unconscious form lightly with his boot. "I second," Vance rumbled. "All in favor?" I asked. 12 hands shot up instantly. Even Silas, who usually hated everyone, raised both hands. "Motion carried," I said, checking my imaginary watch. "Mason is fired. And arrested. Vance, please remove the trash." Vance grabbed Mason by the ankle and dragged him out of the room. The door closed, leaving us alone with the board. Ryan looked at them. "The feral clause," Ryan said, his voice calm but icy. "Is it still a concern?" "No, Alpha," Silas said quickly, bowing his head. You seem very much in control." "Good, then get out. I have a merger to finish." The board members filed out faster than school children at the final bell. As soon as the door clicked shut, Ryan staggered. "Whoa!" I grabbed his arm, bracing myself to catch 300 pounds of werewolf. "I've got you. Sit down. Not on the glass. Here." I guided him to the only surviving chair. He sank into it, his head falling back. "Did we win?" he asked, closing his eyes. "We won," I said, examining the bite on his shoulder. It was deep, but it was already clotting. "You kept your crown, Your Majesty, and you destroyed a $50,000 table." Ryan cracked one eye open. He grinned. It was a bloody, tired, beautiful grin. "Put it on Mason's tab." Chapter 24. Licking Wounds. We didn't go back to work. We went straight to the penthouse. I locked the door and led Ryan into the private bathroom attached to his office. It was a cavernous space with black marble floors and a walk-in shower big enough for a pony. "Sit," I commanded, pointing to the bench in the shower. Ryan obeyed. He hissed as I peeled the ruined shirt off his skin. The fabric was stuck to the blood drying on his chest. "Sorry," I murmured, turning on the water. I grabbed a warm washcloth. "This is going to sting." "I've had worse," he grunted. But when I pressed the cloth to the shark bite on his shoulder, his leg thumped involuntarily against the tile. Thump. I paused, looking at him. "Really? Even when you're in pain?" "It's a reflex," he muttered, looking embarrassed. "It means I trust you." I continued cleaning the wound. The water ran pink into the drain. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something heavier, thicker. Intimacy. I was standing between his legs, tending to his wounds. He was watching my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You called me your mate," I said softly, not looking him in the eye. Ryan went still. "I did." "Was that legal strategy or a werewolf thing?" Ryan reached out. He took my chin in his hand and tilted my head up. "Diana," he said, "wolves don't lie about mates. Mason knew it, the board knew it, and I think you know it too." I looked at him. "I'm human, Ryan. I drive a Subaru. I drink cheap wine. I'm not a queen." "You walked into a room with a shark hybrid, armed with nothing but a radio jamming device and a purse," Ryan said, his thumb brushing my lip. "You are the most dangerous creature in this building, and you are mine." "Yours?" I raised an eyebrow. "I thought I was just the employee with the hazard pay." "You are that, too," he murmured, leaning closer. "But mostly, mine." He kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It tasted like copper and victory. It was hungry and possessive, consuming me whole. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, not caring about the blood or the wetsuit. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the heat of his skin and the beat of his heart against mine. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. "So," I whispered, resting my forehead against his, "does this mean I get the Subaru dealership?" Ryan laughed, a deep rumble against my chest. "I'll buy you the whole damn factory, Diana." Chapter 25. The Tributes. 2 days later, I returned to my desk. The office was buzzing. People were actually working. The glitch was gone. The air felt lighter, cleaner. I sat down and turned on my computer. Then I noticed the pile on my desk. It wasn't paperwork. Sitting on top of my inbox was a very expensive, very raw T-bone steak wrapped in gold foil. Next to it was a large, smoked ham bone. And next to that was a single black leather dress shoe. A man's shoe. Specifically, a Ferragamo. It had been chewed on. "What on earth?" I muttered. "It's a tribute," a voice said. I looked up. Ryan was leaning against my doorframe. He looked fully healed, wearing a crisp gray suit. He looked every inch the king. "A tribute?" I asked, picking up the chewed shoe. "Who sends a chewed shoe?" "Vance," Ryan said, suppressing a smile. "He's apologizing for doubting you. He chewed it himself to soften the leather. It's a sign of submission." I stared at the shoe. "That is disgusting. And sweet, but mostly disgusting." "The steak is from Silas," Ryan continued. "He wants you to have protein for the pup. And the bone is from the legal department." "The legal department gave me a bone?" "They respect a killer instinct," Ryan shrugged. "You ousted Mason. You are now the alpha female, the Luna. They are trying to curry favor." I looked at the pile of raw meat and ruined footwear. I sighed. "Can you tell them I prefer Amazon gift cards?" "I'll issue a memo," Ryan promised. He walked over to my desk and leaned down, kissing the top of my head. "Ready for the morning meeting?" "Only if you promise not to growl at the interns." "I make no promises." I smiled and picked up my tablet. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Kale. "Heard you're queen of the jungle now. Does this mean I can bring my laundry over?" I typed back, "One more word and I'll send Vance to chew your shoes." I stood up, grabbed my coffee, and walked toward the boardroom. Ryan was waiting for me, holding the door open. Ranger, who I had brought to work today, trotted out from under my desk, holding the smoked bone in his mouth. Ranger looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Ranger. Ryan gave a subtle nod. Ranger wagged his tail once. I shook my head. "Men," I muttered. I walked into the boardroom, head held high. I was Diana Galloway. I drove a Subaru. I had a retirement plan, and I was the mate to the Alpha King. And if anyone gave me trouble, I knew exactly where to scratch to make the problem go away. The end.